So, what is AI ethics, and why is it something that is important to people in technology or outside of technology, even?
Right. I mean, I think that, the way to think about it is that, there are things about automation, whether it's AI that involves robotics or AI that things like machine learning, which is kind of the hype today, or generative models and LLMs. The fact is that, if they can be two ways that they can affect us, I guess. One is that they may make they may be built in a way that they result in incorrect conclusions, right? And that means that there are either biases built into the training of the models that are developed, or built into the process by which we build the models, or by the outcomes that those models produce. So the question is, if we are concerned about equity and I guess to do the right thing with automation, then fundamentally we are talking about AI ethics in that sense. And then the second part is just our own moral reasoning about how, at the end of the day, automation will influence everything we do in society. So, what does that mean to us from a value perspective, from a personal and a societal value perspective? And those could be influenced by what we think of ethical actions of both the human being and the machine, I guess.
Can you give me an example of bias in AI? It's something I've read a lot about. We hear it in the news, and I immediately jump to racial bias or something like that. Is that what you're referring to, or can you
Right.
elaborate on
It
that?
could be as simple as what is happening with, say, machine learning models that are being used to do predictive policing, right? I'm sure you've heard of that. So that's like, in Chicago police or the LAPD, and even Omaha PD sometimes has used predictive policing models that are using AI algorithms. Now, the problem is that these predictive policing models could be biased. I don't know the specific ones they use, but because of multiple reasons. One is, say, they are trained on prior data set of potential criminal actions in a zip code, and now your model is continuing to predict behavior in a certain part of the city that the police acts on, and potentially that could be completely wrong because your model has not been trained on a representative population of potential criminals in our system, right? So it's very similar to statistics in general. I mean, if you're going to make predictions, you better make sure that you have a representative sample that is used to train the model. And there are many examples in the public space, that have been publicized. Not predictive policing is one, but there are ones like, Amazon using an algorithm to screen applications, which they built using data from their own company, and essentially it would look for keywords that potentially would identify, people who are good software developers or software leaders. And you know what? They rejected most women. Why? Because the kinds of verbs they were looking for in the training data, or that was used to train the model, were mostly male verbs. I mean, people who like directing and leading, and the kind of words men use in their resumes may not be the same that women use in their resumes. And then also the profile of the software engineers in Amazon may be majority men. And if you're going to use that data to train your predictive model for, hey, this is a prospective candidate that I want to choose or interview, it was eliminating female candidates who maybe have been equally qualified. So that's another example that got a lot of publicity in the last 6 7 years. So
For someone who's maybe not as technically deep within understanding how AI is built, can you kind of go in on how companies are currently constructing these models and where they're deficient? And where do you think that they can improve and how they should be building them a little bit more in the future to be more ethical and inclusive?
Absolutely. We one of the areas of study that I have in my team, we are doing, we're trying to study what makes machine learning, especially. That's only one part of AI, by the way. So there's robotics also. I'm just talking about machine learning, but how to make it fairer, meaning more equitable at the end of the day in its ability to predict. I just thought of another example that might be more serious. For example, I was just going to say in medicine. I mean, if I'm going to use data to predict disease or predict, whether someone has a hairline fracture in their foot, I mean, these kind of things. And if the images you're using to classify the data or to build your model comes from a very narrow set of the population, you really cannot trust the model 100%. I mean, it's not responsible for you as a physician to just use the models. There's a lot of concern that in health area, especially, these kind of things can cause challenges if they are used blindly. In terms of answering your question, Tanner, I mean, the fact is that when you want to build a model that or a machine learning algorithm, when we say model, it's basically a mathematical expression in a much more narrower sense. But basically, when you're designing a model, you have to start with you know, do we have a good training data set? So, do we have a representative data set that is large enough to kind of help us make the machine learn that these are the features that are good predictors of whatever you're trying to predict. I mean, let's take the example of, say, I mean, I did a long time ago before machine learning, we did a project where we wanted to identify, based on an insurance claim, whether the claim is fraudulent, right? So there was this issue with a local company that basically was having a certain part of the United States, they were getting a lot of fraudulent claims. And these were all manually checked. Now, if you're getting millions of insurance claims, right, as a national company, the difficulty is, well, how do I kind of speed this process up and also make it better, right? So you could use machine learning for something. What I would do is I would identify a large representative sample of insurance claims that exist, and I will also identify a small set of fraudulent claims and try to then train my model to learn that these are the kind of characteristics of fraudulent claims versus valid claims, right? And once the model learns, and depending on the kind of algorithm you're using, it can also continue to evolve on its own as new data is thrown at it. So as you add more data to the model, it gets better at predicting uh, the fact that in this example that claims are fraudulent, right? So that's one aspect of building good applications. The other is, you have developers who are involved in the process of developing the model and the software that runs the model for customers. Now the problem here is that if the developers are all kind of in this, they represent the same biases, then you code into the software the biases that you have. So the diversity of the teams that develop applications becomes important too. So it's not just the training of the data set, but also the process by which we build the models and the applications. That becomes relevant because you may just have this kind of groupthink effect where the same people are building the software and they're essentially adding their own implicit. Maybe they think they are being very good at being, thinking about the whole population, but just applying their implicit biases into the code. And that also adds to the absence of fairness or equity of that. And then you have the outcomes themselves. I mean, if the human beings are using the outcomes blindly, the human decision makers, and then that's a danger because there will always be, even in a machine-based algorithm, false positive. false negatives. So, I mean, we need to understand that it's not 100% game. It's not like I toss the coin and I know head and tail. It is a probabilistic venture, and it gives you with certain degree of accuracy what, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be right. So that's the challenge, that we need better AI literacy in some sense, for even business people who on the average might be using it, but also those who are developing the system. They need to be very cognizant and have heightened awareness about these kind of challenges. It's not that you can't build good modeling. It's more about understanding the weaknesses of the model and understanding the constraints by which the model can be applied. It's true of statistics in general, but it's also true of machine learning, right? Even if the machine is able to learn on its own. So there is a lot of movement on things like human in the loop systems. So basically, introducing human decision makers as a process of development. So as you get better and better outcomes from machines, you compare them to human logic and see if they're as good as human beings. I mean, so like the Turing test in some ways. But we are not asking for perfection. We build systems, at least have intentionality in the way we adopt, in the way we build models and apply them. And also, I think the other aspect, which a lot of companies are now doing, IBM is doing this, and Microsoft, they have this responsible AI initiatives. That in that initiative, they are trying to say, okay, we're going to build machines that can explain their reasoning, just like you and I can explain why we came to a decision, in spite of our implicit biases. The same thing, machines must be able to explain. So this explainable machine learning, technology, where people are trying to build in explanatory abilities in the models itself. So if I take a decision that, hey, this claim is fraudulent, as a machine, I should be able to also explain why I reached that conclusion, right? And be able to explain it in a way that an average decision maker or human being in general can understand the logic. Now it's still a ways away. I mean, but I think like generative AI, LLM kind of approaches where you can use natural language to provide explanations may make this better. But we are not there yet. I don't think so.
These AI models are black boxes in many ways. I've seen there's people Google talking about how they don't even fully understand them and they kind of just learn things on their own. There was something about how it learned some language just by itself because it had enough data and it kind of figured it out. So, yeah, the way of making it a little bit more transparent and in its decision making and explaining that to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very interesting hack about LLMs. Because my PhD student actually, he was showing this to some of our undergrads because we were introducing them first, and we want to tell them what AI looks like. So he confused LLMs by just adding words in his questions that were from another language. So he mixed English with another language, and then the LLM starts hallucinating, answering things. So it's very easy to hack into these. I mean, not easy, but I guess they can be, cause for worry for us, especially as we start adopting them in scale. I think that's where when people talk about, a related issue is this loss of. People think that all these jobs are going to go away, but the point is that I think the higher order thinking, which is so important. Characteristic of human consciousness, I think, that's going to become even more valuable. And I think that's really what people have to understand, that the automation may take away repeatable kind of jobs, things that happen in the same way, the same every time, and maybe some semi-automatic, there is some judgment or some prediction involved. But truly unstructured things, which human beings are so good at, something that happens to you that you have never seen before, but you're able to immediately work on it. Not possible for machines, right?
It's a fair point. We keep hearing as time goes on and more people learn about AI and machine learning or large language models, we keep hearing exactly what you're saying is human intervention is really important. With your policing example, the health insurance example, even HR hiring practices. people are starting to understand now, and I'm saying this from my own perspective, because when ChatGPT came out, I was very excited, but I honestly just thought it was a magic box. You don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, and that it's designed by someone or a group of someone's who, exactly as you said, whether consciously or unconsciously, are feeding in their bias. As that goes on, just like last week, we met with Hunter from Code Buddy. He was a software engineer dealing in building these, and he said something that kind of really clicked with me, was that he had to start turning AI off sometimes. He uses it; it's a wonderful tool, but he was starting to realize that you're losing a bit of your creative edge. You're not putting yourself into the product, and you're exactly right. There's always going to be issues. I think more and more information is coming out that it's not a magic black box, and it's not just creating knowledge, it's kind of regurgitating and analyzing knowledge for you, and the chat gpt example at the very least, when you realize that it's made by a human being, it allows you to kind of pause a little bit and wonder really what's put into it, right? And I think that's really powerful. So I want to talk about you real quick. So Dr. Kazanchi, you have been a professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha for almost 23 years. Is that right?
20. This is my 24th year. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. That's amazing. You're professor in information systems and quantitative analysis, which is exciting for me. I'm a statistics nerd. But when did you start really getting into and diving into AI and machine learning? Because for most people, it happened sometime like last year, a year and a half ago, when ChatGPT came out. When did you kind of realize this scene was something worth digging into?
Right. I mean, I think, when one has to understand that, I guess I'm in the academic setting, so we see a lot of the developments pretty early on. But I think, the public consciousness about AI has just, exponentially increased because of OpenAI and these kind of initiatives in the public space. So, but, if you think about the fundamentals of, say, machine learning, which is a critical part of AI, you know, it is really old math. Since you're a statistics, you're interested, this stuff has been around since the 60s and 70s. I mean, in the sense of the kind of models that we use today. I mean, they're of course more sophisticated, and computational power is what has changed. So the fact that we can now get GPUs and process large scale models very, very rapidly, that's really what has changed the dynamics of and the speed at which we are, changing in terms of what AI can do for us. But for me personally, I mean, I actually don't have a computer science background. So interestingly, I have a civil engineering bachelor's, and I worked as a civil engineer for a long time, and then did grad degrees in finance and information systems. So my PhD in information systems. So I am very interested in the socio-technical aspect, right? So that means this connection between human beings, the technology itself, whatever that is. We had, decision support systems in the past, and project management software, and now we have AI-based stuff. So, but basically, what AI does is it adds intelligence to some degree, or at least mimicked intelligence. Uh, so that allows us to do ask much more interesting questions, I guess, out of our data, out of our fields of interest. So, for example, I'm interested in, for example, one of the questions I'm trying to answer is, well, how do you use AI to predict technology project success and failure? Right? I mean, this is project management, basic project management. I want to know what are the parameters that make a software project successful. Now, I have studied projects for decades, and I've studied the interaction between people, technology, and software projects in a distributed setting before COVID and everything made it so kind of in, right? So, what are the ways we can succeed when distributed work happens, and what are the factors that influence distributed work? But now we can ask questions like, well, I have all this data about projects in my company. I mean, can I use deep learning models or machine learning models to predict what kind of scopes would result in success and what kind of scopes would result in failure? What scope and risk together that combination would result in a different outcome. So now I have a very interesting set of research questions I can ask that I could not ask without machine learning model. But of course, the key is to have, and that's the difficult part. You need to most of the data that companies store about, say, technology projects. I'm just taking that as an example. I'm very excited about the idea. I mean, I gave a keynote almost 7 years ago about how AI can help project management, but nothing happened in the 7 years. We just recently started trying to answer these questions by collecting data from local companies. The problem is that companies don't really curate the data they get about use, right? And especially if you're a large company, you really don't want to talk about failure. I mean, even though people in startup community would say, well, failing fast is a good thing, not in technology projects. You spend $1 million on a project and then it's failing. You don't want anyone to really know that. So that's kind of the challenge. We don't have curated, I guess, data sets, and you have to actually curate the data and then try to apply machine learning approaches to solve those problems, answer those questions, right? So we are testing waters. I've actually written about this in theoretical form, but now we are trying to empirically see if this is something companies should do. And so this is a very practical.
That really shows the bias in the data sets, though, right? If people are not willing to acknowledge their failures, maybe there's some personal or social or cost
Yeah,
to that for the people. So they're kind of sweeping those under the rug. Well, the information that you're modeling your algorithms under are only showing the successes. So, how applicable are those in predicting things or make following those decisions that the AI is spitting out, because it itself is probably too overly optimistic on that chance of success because it doesn't understand that there are more failures than there actually are.
exactly. And so that's why I don't ask. I mean, I mentioned that as an example, but generally we don't try to investigate questions like success and failure. What we think about is, okay, you had this budget, you had this time frame. Did you exceed the time frame? Did you exceed the budget for this project? We don't ask people about failure or success. We say, okay, let's look at the raw facts and then look at your scope, and we kind of try to do some ratings of scope and complexity and risk, and then say, okay, can we combine all these variables and do some predictive modeling about, hey, if the scope was different, would we be within budget? So that's an indirect way of looking at success and failure. But so that's, I mean, you can do basic statistics like regression or something, but trying to do it in a predictive way where I can say, hey, I'm thinking of this project which has this level of risk in my view. What kind of team should I put together? So actually, if I had the data about team members, like, oh, I had this person with a Python expertise, with a project management expertise, and they were in this team and they were within budget for this type of project. Now imagine if I had thousands of records like that, I could actually build you a model that would say, okay, how should the team look like for a given project and given
Mhm.
risk, right?
Yeah.
So that's really, you're absolutely right. Data needs to be representative and curated. I mean, and this is true of health. The health sector struggles with this. Uh, they're trying to use AI in health sector. I think there are certain places where the application is pretty straightforward, but I'm more worried about the edge cases where these things are going to produce bad results, and that's really what concerns me most.
Yeah, the thing that worries me a lot about these AI stuff is just the level of scale that it seems to be using. Like, we're anymore, it feels, at least today, that a lot of companies are using the same models, whether that be open AIs or it's the new llama from Facebook
Meta.
Meta.
Yeah.
There's Google has their own with Gemini. There's just a few ones, and everyone seems to be piggybacking on those. But inherently, any system in any way, whether it's technology or not, will have certain biases in one way or another. Whether that be towards men, women, it may be age related, it could be location related. Whether it's more geared towards rural people versus urban people, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Every system will have its own like sweet spots. But if we're all going to just one, two, three, or a handful of systems and treating that as a generalist, then inherently we're going to be accentuating and exacerbating these biases in there and making it moving everything towards a mean of, like, I don't know, just mediocrity, I would guess.
No, I think this is, that's a very, good thought, because I think the problem, I mean, I guess, first of all, I'm worried also about the fact that there is lack of, understanding. I mean, as Wired said, you treat that as a black box. I mean, you have, if you implicitly trust what you're using, whether it's LLMs or other things, I mean, you're essentially giving away a lot of control, right? And this kind of relates to my initial conversation with you about human rights. I mean, the fact is that you know uh, whether, as we mentioned, insurance or healthcare, or even access to education, or I mean, we're talking about personalized education using machine learning and AI, right? I mean, all of these things are great. I mean, I believe that, for example, Sal Khan in the Khan Academy, he's building this AI tutor, and I don't know if you've seen this,
Hmm.
but it's brilliant. It gives you free tutoring anywhere in the world, right? So now you got Khan Academy plus free tutoring using an AI. And it actually follows along with your logic and gives you logic back. He showed a demo, and I attended this demo, and it's just crazy how good it is, right? And it uses LLMs in the front end, so it's natural language, and then in the back end, it's got a model that's trained on, say, statistical science or other kinds of STEM disciplines, and it kind of coaches you along. Now, I think that's great for access to education, right? But what about the digital divide? You got rural Nebraska with 3G or 4G, right? And so the human rights aspect is great. Access is good, but who's giving them access to the infrastructure, right? You can't have a kid get to this. And I'm just talking about the US. Forget about developing Africa and India and all the other parts of the world. So that's why I think the human rights aspects are so critical. Right? We need to overcome the digital divide. One of the discussions I had with my undergraduate class just a few weeks ago was, well, why don't we treat internet access just like we treat access to roads? Right? I mean, do we ever think that who's built this road? I mean, we just want the road to work so I can get to the other end, right?
Mhm.
And I want internet to be a human right. I want it to be available at the right speed for people to have access to Sal Khan's tutor, AI tutor, right? So I think there are so many cascading impacts, which the average person is not really realizing today. But I think whether it's access to healthcare, it's the same problem, right? I mean, if you're going to move some basic healthcare tasks to an AI, the routine kind of thing, like I'll diagnose your cold or cough, give me an image and I'll tell you whether this little thing is cancer or not, or I mean, these are all possible theoretically with the machine learning approaches, and I think there are a lot of companies working on this in the Silicon Valley. But the difficulty to me is that we still have a massive digital divide, both in terms of access to the internet infrastructure and also in terms of literacy. Uh, so how do we overcome that first? And whose responsibility is it? Is it
Hmm.
the state? Is it us as society? We take it as individuals. I mean, we are a very individualistic society. So is that what we mean when we say access? I mean, I think there needs to be some conversation socially about how do we provide the infrastructure so everyone has equal access, right? Not the one who pays $80 a month in Omaha to get Cox internet, which doesn't work most of
I guess I've never
the
thought about it before where, we think in work context, it's like your AI, like in coding, let's say, the developer who uses AI is going to be way better than the developer who doesn't. So you're never going to lose your job to an AI, but you are going to lose your job to somebody who is using AI. At least that's the hope.
Correct.
But if we go back to, let's say, a young adult, what is the divide going to be between a student who has spent their schooling career with AI versus a student who has spent their career without AI? Like, what is
Yeah.
that divide going to look like? I've never thought of it in that context.
Not only, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say this is a much more powerful problem to resolve as a society. I mean, we talk about haves and have-nots. It's not about economic haves and have-nots. It's the fact that infrastructure. This is infrastructure. I mean, this is a basic necessity. I mean, we need to have literacy from kindergarten in terms of AI, but I think we also need to provide access to the infrastructure. I mean, the farmer who wants to sell their commodity on the commodity exchange in Omaha, I mean, they can't do that if they don't have access to the high speeds, right? I mean, how are you going to do it? So this is not. I mean, this is a societal big challenge, and I believe that it's a human rights issue. I think that we have to decide, who does this, and I also think about AI. By the way, I mean, talking about a human rights issue is who governs AI, right? I mean, do we self-govern, which everyone, all the private sector would love to have, but does the state do some regulation? In the EU, they have passed the AI Act. I don't know if you're aware of that, but and that AI Act includes penalties for things that Google does for you. If you infringe on my privacy uh, without asking my permission, I can basically get sued as a company, right? And AI makes it a lot easier because now, if Google wants to do a personalized ad to Tanner based on your visits to different Google search terms, they will write the AI model is giving you a customized ad, okay, on your screen. And this is happening already, right? I mean, the difficulty is that it could be a racist ad, it could be a discriminatory ad because it doesn't really know who you are, really. It's just predicting based on the data it has collected, right? And it's spotting ads or campaigns to you based on that. So it'll get better, no doubt. But that's the issue. These are the kind of issues that we have to deal with. And the fact is that if someone does get discriminated, or if it causes harm, then who is responsible? And I believe that we need to pass our own AI Act in the United States. We are way behind on this. The EU is way ahead. They have already passed that, and it is law. It just passed early this year, maybe.
So it's really fascinating listening to you talk, because I think most people you talk to have a very strong opinion one way or the other. And what I'm referring to that is, I love AI, I use it for everything, or I hate it, it's going to kill us in the next 50 years. You have presented a very balanced view. You're excited, you understand, you utilize these models, but and where I'm leading with is, you have just started a course, or it's starting soon, is digital human rights in AI.
It's finishing actually.
Finishing now, perfect. And so what's the premise? What are you hoping to get across through this? And this conversation is already really led in that direction, but what are some of those key takeaways you want your students to learn from this human rights and AI course?
So we I mean, I designed the course to follow along a United Nations initiative on AI and human rights, right? And I mean, so I wanted the students to kind of critically, and this is a very discussion based class, so the students get to read some challenges and also propose some solutions. So it's not just all about saying, well, hey, I mean, these are all the problems: predictive policing, or access to education, or discrimination on the basis of gender or disability or place of residence, as we talked about, right? So but it's all about understanding that what are the challenges and how do we come to terms with them. And I divided it into like these 6 themes that the United Nations has trying to address. And these themes relate to privacy and surveillance, or sustainable development goals and digital divide, which we just talked about a little bit. It's about civic space and content governance. Should Facebook, for example, or Meta self-govern content as they do right now, or there should be some regulatory aspects to it from federal or state government, right? Content governance is important. You misinformation, disinformation. I mean, who manages? I mean, now it's going to get even worse as we get closer to election. There are state actors, there are individual entities who are supporting this. So, I mean, we discussed about what are the possibilities and challenges, and then how do you actually overcome. So these are some examples. I mean, there are others, but at the end of the day, what I want them to think about is, well, look at this critically, and what are the things you as citizens of the future can do, right? And so we discussed things like, well, hey, there should be some state policy. There should be, maybe, and I brought in speakers from around the country, lawyers who work in the privacy domain, I had a local lawyer from Kutak Rock talk about privacy issues and AI in a corporate setting. We talked about AI and constitutional rights, basic constitutional rights. So, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. How do we control these? How do you manage this while allowing for, while making sure that there is less disinformation? I guess not absence of disinformation, but less. So I mean, these are the some examples. I even had a speaker from the United Kingdom who is actually working on the UK's AI Act, and
Wow.
she came and talked about why they're doing what they're doing. So try to give them many different lenses while also discussing and trying to pin them down on, hey, it's not just an opinion now. You got to be part of the solution. You got to figure out what to do. You are the future voters and citizens. These are all 19-year-olds and 18-year-old and 20.
Would it be fair to say then that AI is not inherently evil? It's not going to destroy the earth, but now is the time to start putting these constraints and laws before it does get out of hand. And I'm not talking Terminator style, but exactly as we're saying, is widespread blanket believed bias is probably one of the bigger concerns.
Right. I mean, there are also other risks, like the government doing. I mean, I don't know if you have ever traveled internationally. I mean, now when you walk to enter the United States, re-enter the United States as a U.S. citizen, uh, they immediately take your photograph without asking your permission, which is just weird to me because when I go to Europe, they actually everything is consent based. You have to be informed why something is happening, and you come here and you go to a website, it just immediately opts you in, or you go to the DHS's counter and the man says, "Look in the camera." I'm like, I mean, I didn't even have time to think about this. I'm so afraid I'm coming back in, and oh my gosh. So the fact is that there is all this going on in the background that we don't even think about. But I'm worried about things like risks that the European AI Act has addressed, things like social scoring systems or AI that can be manipulated for negative outcomes. These risks are unacceptable, and we have to come up with guardrails for these kind of risks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just making sure that everything's out in the open and actually having a conversation. And conversations like this are so important because again, it just educates people and keep them knowing what's happening so they can have their voice out there and kind of shift that way and know what's unacceptable. One thing I wanted to touch on too, we've talked to so many people, and the ability to understand and know these tools and figure out how to manipulate them is so important. And we touched on education and growing up with those things. I know that you do a course called Code Crushers to teach young girls how to actually code. So I would be remiss if we didn't get a chance to have you highlight this and talk about the program, how it came to be, and what it all does.
I truly appreciate that because that's my passion project. So I started. This is our 10th anniversary this year, so it's
Awesome.
amazing. I've been around for 10 years. It's all privately funded. It's called Code Crush, and the girls who participate in it are code crushers, absolutely. But it's not only about coding. So we started it in 2014. Actually, I convinced Google Council Bluffs to give me a small grant to start a pilot program. And in 2014 spring, we launched our first Code Crush, and it was designed as an immersion experience. So we wanted to bring female students from around Nebraska, Iowa, and South Dakota from eighth grade and ninth grade to Omaha, free of cost, and provide them an immersive experience in technology careers and all computer science related things, but also expose them to corporations and startups in Omaha that are doing these wonderful things in different domains, all the way from railroad to insurance to huddle and sports and all these companies. We used to visit them with the whole group of kids and their teachers. And the uniqueness of the program was this, that we invited 30 girls and we also required that they bring a teacher. So the idea was that we would pay for the teacher's time or replace them with a sub, and we would pay from the grant. And the kids had to pay nothing. And so we got kids from all around Nebraska, all the way from the border of Colorado down to Kansas City to here. So, I mean, all this group of kids would come with the teachers, and we would then, half day we would do some academic things like, and also it's not, we just don't did only coding, we did innovation, design thinking, bioinformatics, how to use computers to, study, do biology. And so this is way before code, girls who code these things. And so it was a very evidence-based kind of approach, and we try to give them these academic sessions, kind of fun ways to learn things like robotics and software engineering and so on. And then we would do like a lot of role models from the industry who were either female or allies of women executives in organizations. And they all came, and we had CIOs and CEOs participate initially. And, so that became kind of the amazing thing was we attracted 150 for 30 spots. So we knew there was a huge pent up demand. And so then after that, I convinced a few foundations in Omaha. That's the beauty of Omaha, is a whole generous private enterprise that gives support, like the Peter Kiewit Foundation, Mutual of Omaha Foundation. So they all hopped on and said, "Hey, yeah, this is a great idea. This is a wonderful thing to try. Why don't you scale it up?" So they actually gave me money for 3 years initially to, this is pre-COVID, to bring girls to Omaha along with the teachers 3 times a year. We did a fall and spring event for 3 nights and 4 days, and then we did a conference in summer where we invited all the alums back to kind of continue networking, as they're growing up in their schools, right? And we have had some amazing success. I mean, to me, that's what makes it worthwhile doing every year. Last year, I invited a alum, young lady, Grace Meline. She was from Oakland, Nebraska, which is kind of near the border of Colorado, and she came as an eighth grader in 2014 to the first program, and then she came back last year to give a keynote to the Code Crush participants. And one of the things she said was that she started getting interested in bioinformatics in eighth grade when she came to us, and she was the only girl in her school who was interested in something like this. And she came back to do a bachelor's here, graduated, got a full ride to NYU Med School, and she came in her first year, I think. Yeah, it was her end of the first year when she came to visit us. So to me, that's one story, but we have lots of such stories. We have touched about 600 young girls in this program, and we continue doing that. We have created a field version of it called Road Crush, where we go to schools if we are invited, and spend a day with and the other part I did not mention, many of the classes are taught by my undergrads, so it's actually very nice. They are closer to the kids in age, and they kind of giving back in a different way. It's been amazing.
It sounds really cool. Tanner teed this up for me. I'm a girl dad. I have 4 girls, and just a couple weeks ago we were talking, my wife and I were talking about our youngest 2 getting into coding. None of them have shown any interest yet, but we're like, "Man, that is the skill of the future. If you can learn coding, if you can get into AI, the doors will open." And
That's the thing. We want to just kind of use this as an inspirational thing. That's really.
yeah.
We actually teach AI now in Code Crush. So we do teach them
Cool.
some computer vision, how to analyze images. I mean, it's simplistic, but still, it's kind of cool. For an eighth grader, it's cool.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Khazanchi, we're getting near the end of our program here. Thank you for the awesome conversation. I really like the ethics spin on AI. It's not good, it's not bad. It just needs to have some guardrails, is kind of the message I'm taking. And I fully agree with that message. But where can people learn more about Code Crush, or you personally? Where can we direct people?
Well, my name is unique enough. If they Google it, I'm the only Khazanchi in Nebraska, I guess. but no, if they don't have access, I'm at UNO, easily accessible by email. It's just my last name at unomaha.edu. And Code Crush, you can learn a lot about Code Crush by just going to codecrush.unomaha.edu. And we also are on social media at Code Crush Omaha on Twitter or X. And the same thing for me at Khazanchi on Twitter or X. We post a lot of our photos from Code Crush experiences on Twitter. So
Again, thank you so much for joining us. Amazing conversation. And we'd like to thank everybody who made it all the way to the end. It's my normal thing of please like and subscribe. One day I will put that at the beginning, but I forget every single time. Yeah, make sure to spread the word. We appreciate all of you, and appreciate everyone, all the good messages that people send. Things have been really ramping up and growing, and we're really excited to bring great guests like today. So we will see you all next week. Bye bye.
thank you.